World of Warcraft, Day of the Dragon, by Richard A. Knack. Chapter 1. War. It had once seemed to some of the Kirin Tor, the magical conclave that ruled the small nation of Darlaron, that the world of Azeroth would never known anything but constant bloodshed. There had been the Trolls, before the forming of the Azeroth Alliance, the Alliance of Lordaeron, and when the last humanity had dealt with the foul menace, the first wave of orcs had descended upon the lands, appearing out of a horrific rip in the very fabric of the universe. At first, nothing had seemed able to stop those grotesque invaders, but gradually, what had looked to be a horrible slaughter had turned instead into an agonizing stalemate. Battles had been won by attrition, hundreds had died on both sides, all seemingly for no good reason. For years, the Kirin Tor had foreseen no end, but that finally changed. The Alliance had managed to push back the Horde, eventually routing them entirely. Even the Orcs' great chieftain, the legendary Orgrim Doomhammer, had been unable to stem the advancing armies that had finally captivated. With the exception of a few renegade clans, the surviving invaders had been rounded up into enclaves and kept under secure watch by military units led personally by members of the Knights of the Silver Hand. For the first time in many, many years, lasting peace looked to be a promise, not a faint wish. And yet, a sense of unease still touched the senior council of the Kirin Tor. Thus it was that the highest of the high met in the Chamber of Air, so called because it seemed a room without walls, only a vast ever-changing sky with clouds, lights, and darkness racing past the master wizards, as if the time of the world had sped up. Only the gray stone floor, with its gleaming diamond symbol representing the four elements, gave any solidity to the scene. Certainly the wizards themselves did nothing in that regard, for they, clad in their dark cloaks that covered not only their face but form, seemed to waver with the movements of the sky, almost as if they too were but an illusion. Although their numbers included both men and women, the only sign of that was whenever one of them spoke, at which point a face would become partly visible, if somewhat indistinct in detail. There were 6 in this meeting, the 6 most senior, although not necessarily most gifted. The leaders of the Kirin Tor were chosen by several means, magic, but one of them. "Something has happened in Cosmodan," announced the first, in a sternisation voice, the vague image of a bearded face briefly visible. A myriad pattern of stars fluttered through his body. "Near or in the caverns held by the Dragonmaw clan." "Tell us something we don't already know," rasped a second, a woman, likely of the elder years, but still strong of will. A moon briefly shone through her cowl. The orcs there remain one of the few holdouts now that Doomhammer's warriors have surrendered and the chieftain's gone missing. The first mage clearly took some umbrage, but he kept himself calm as he replied, "Very well. Perhaps this will interest you more. I believe Deathwing is on the move again." This startled the rest, the elder woman included. Night suddenly changed into day, but the wizards ignored what for them was a common thing in this chamber. Clouds drifted past the head of the third of the number, who clearly did not believe the statement. "Deathwing is dead," the third declared, his form the only one hinting at corpulence. "He plunged into the sea months ago after this very council and the gathering of our strongest struck the mortal blow. No dragon, even him, could withstand such might." Some of the others nodded, but the first went on. "And where was the corpse? Deathwing was like no other dragon, even before the goblins sealed the adamantium plates to his scaly hide. He offered a threat with the potential to dwarf that of the Horde." "But what proof do you have of this his continued existence. This from a young woman, clearly in the bloom of youth. Not as experienced as the others, but still powerful enough to be one of the council. What? The death of 2 red dragons. 2 of Alex Strauss's great gift. Torn asunder in a manner only one of their own kind, one of gargantuan proportions, could have managed. There are other large dragons. A storm began to rage, the lightning and rain falling upon the wizards and yet touching neither them nor the floor. The storm passed in the blink of an eye. A blazing sun once more appeared overhead. The first of the Kirin Tor gave his latest display not even the least of interest. You have obviously never seen the work of Deathwing. Or you'd never make that statement. It may be, as you say, interjected the 5th. The outline of a vague elven visage appeared and disappeared faster than the storm. And if so, a matter of import. But we hardly can concern ourselves with it for now. If Deathwing lives, and now strikes out at his greatest rival's kind, then it only benefits us. After all, Alex Strauss is still a captive of the Dragonmaw clan, and it is her offspring that those orcs have used for years to wreak bloodshed and havoc all over the Alliance. Have we all so forgotten the tragedy of the 3rd Fleet of Kulturas? I suspect Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore never will. After all, he lost his eldest son and everyone else aboard those 6 great ships when the monstrous red leviathans fell upon them. Proudmoore would likely honor Deathwing with a medal if it proved true that the Black Beast was responsible for those 2 deaths. No one argued that point, not even the first mage. Of the mighty vessels, only splinters of wood and a few torn corpses had been left to mark the utter destruction. It had been to Lord Admiral Proudmoore's credit that he had not flattered in its resolve, immediately ordering the build of a new warships to replace those destroyed and pushing on with the war. And, as I stated earlier, we can hardly concern ourselves with that situation now, not with so many more immediate issues with which to deal. Are you referring to the Alterac crisis, aren't you? Rumbled the bearded mage. Why should the continued snipping of Lordaeron and Stormgrad worry us more than Deathwing's possible return? Because now Gilneas has thrown its weight into the situation. Again, the other mages stirred. Even the unspeaking 6, the slightly capitulate shade, moved a step toward the elven form. Of what interest is the bickering of the other 2 kingdoms over that sorry piece of land to getting Greymane? Gilneas is at the tip of the southern peninsula, as far away in the Alliance as any other kingdom is from Alterac. You have to ask. Greymane has always sought the leadership of the Alliance, even though he held back his armies until the orcs finally attacked his own borders. The only reason he ever encouraged King Tyrannus of Lordaeron to action was to weaken the Lordaeron's military might. Now, Tyrannus maintains hold on the Alliance leadership, mostly because of our work and Admiral Proudmoore's open support. Alterac and Stormgrad were neighboring kingdoms that had been at odds since the first days of the war. Thoris Trollbane had thrown the full might of Stormgrad behind the Lordaeron alliance. With Casmodan as its neighbor, it had only made sense for the mountainous kingdom to support a united action. None could argue with the determination of Trollbane's warriors either. If not for them, the orcs would have overrun much of the alliance during the first weeks of the war, certainly promising a different and highly grim outcome overall. Alterac, on the other hand, while speaking much of the courage and righteousness of the cause, had not been so forthcoming with its own troops. Like Gilneas, it had proved only token support, But where Gangramain had held back out of ambition, Lord Paranod, so had been rumored, had done so because of fear. Even among the Kirin it had early on been asked whether Paranod had thought to perhaps make a deal with Doomhammer, should the alliance crumble under the Horde's unceasing onslaught. That fear had proven to have merit. Paranod had indeed betrayed the alliance, but his dastardly act had, fortunately, been short-lived. Taranis, hearing of it, had quickly moved Lordaeron troops in and declared martial law in Alterac. With the war in progress, no one had, at the time, seen fit to complain over such an action, especially Stormgrad. Now that peace had come, Thoros Trollbane had begun to demand that, for its sacrifices, Stormgrad should receive as just due the entire eastern portion of its treacherous former neighbor. Taranis did not see it so. He still debated the merits of either annexing Alterac to its own kingdom or setting upon its throne a new and more reasonable monarch, presumably with sympathetic ear for Lordaeron's causes. Still, Stormgrad had been a loyal, steadfast ally in the struggle, and all knew of Thoros Trollbane and Taranis' admiration for one another. It made the political situation that had come between the pair all the more sad. Gilneas, meanwhile, had no such ties to any of the lands involved. It had always remained separate from the other nations of the Western world. Both the Kirin Tor and King Taranis knew that Gangramain sought to intervene not only to raise his own prestige, but to perhaps further his dreams of expansion. One of Lord Paranord's nephews had fled to that land after the treachery, and rumor had it Greymane supported his claim as successor. A base in Alterac would give Gilneas access to resources the southern kingdom did not have, and the excuse to send its mighty ships across the Great Sea. That, in turn, would draw Kulturas into the equation, the maritime nation being very protective of its naval sovereignty. "This will tear the alliance apart," muttered the young mage with the accent. "It has not come to that point yet," pointed out the elven wizard. "But it may soon. And so we have no time to deal with dragons. If Deathwing lives, it has chosen to renew its vendetta against Alexstrasza. I, for one, will not oppose him. The fewer dragons in this world, the better. Their day is done, after all." "I have heard," came a voice with no inflection, no identifying gender, "that once the elves and dragons were allies, even respected friends." The elven form turned to the last of the mages, a slim, lanky shape, little more than a shadow. "Tales, only, I can assure you. We would not deny the traffic with such monstrous beasts." Clouds and suns gave way to stars and moons. The sixth mage bowed slightly as if in apology. "I appear to have heard wrong. My mistake." "You're right about the importance of claiming this political situation down," the bearded wizard rumbled to the fifth. "And I agree, it must take priority. Still, we can't afford to ignore what is happening around Cosmodan. Whether or not I am wrong about Deathwing, so long as the orcs there hold the Dragon Queen captive, there are threats to the stability of the land." "We need an observer, then," interjected the elder female. "Someone to maintain watch on matters, and only alert us if the situation there becomes critical." "But who? We can spare no one now." "There is one." The sixth mage glided a step forward. The face remained in shadow even when the figure spoke. "There is Ronan." "Ronan?" bursted the bearded mage. "Ronan? After his last debacle? He isn't even fit to wear the robes of a wizard. He's more of a danger than a hope. He is unstable, a maverick, untrustworthy, criminal. The sixth waited until all had spoken, then slowly nodded. And the only skilled wizard we can afford to be without at this juncture. Besides, this is simply a mission of observance. He will be nowhere near any potential crisis. His duty will be to monitor matters and report back. That is all. When no more protests arose, the Dark Mage added, I am certain that he has learned his lesson. Let us hope so, muttered the older of the women. He may have accomplished his last mission, but it cost most of his comrades their lives. This time he will go alone, with only a guide to bring him to the edge of the Alliance-controlled lands. He shall not even enter Cosmodan. A sphere of seeing will enable him to watch from a distance. It is simple enough, the younger female responded, even for Rohan. The elven figure nodded brusquely. Then let us agree on this, and be done with the topic. Perhaps if we are fortunate, Deathwing will swallow Ronan, and choke to death, thus finishing forever the matters of both. He surveyed the others and added, And now I must demand that we finally concentrate on Gilneas' entry into Alterac's situation, and what role we may play to defuse it. He stood as he had for the past 2 hours, head down, eyes closed in concentration. Around him, only a dim light, with no source, gave any illumination to the chamber. Not that there was much to see. A chair he had left unused stood to the side, and behind him on the thick stone wall hung a tapestry upon which had been sewn an intricate, knowing eye of gold on a field of violet. Below the eye, 3 daggers, also gold, darted earthward. The flag and symbols of Darlaron had stood tall in their guardianship of the Alliance during the war, even if not every member of the Kirin Tor had performed their duties with complete honor. Ronan, came a voice without inflection, from everywhere and nowhere in the chamber. From under thick, fiery hair, he looked up into the darkness. With eyes a startling green, his nose had been broken once by a fellow apprentice, but despite his skills, Ronan had never bothered to have it fixed. Still, he was not unhandsome, with a strong, clean jaw and angular features. One permanently arched brow ever gave him a sardonic, questioning look that had more than once gotten him in trouble with his masters, and matters were not helped by his attitude, which matched his expression. Tall, slim, and clad in elegant robes of midnight blue, he made for quite a sight, even to other wizards. Ronan hardly appeared reluctant, even though his last mission had cost the lives of 5 good men. He stood straight and eyed the murk, waiting to see from which direction the other wizard would speak him. You summoned? I've waited, the crimson-tressed spellcaster whispered, not without some impatience. It could not be helped. I myself had to wait until the matter was brought up with someone else. A tall, cloaked, and hooded figure half emerged from the gloom. The 6th member of the Kirin Tor Inner Council. It was... For the first time, some eagerness shone in the eyes of Ronan. And my penance. Is my probation over? Yes, you have been granted your return to our ranks. Under the provision that you agreed to taking the task of import immediately. They have that much faith left in me? Bitterness returned to the young mage's voice. After the others died? You are the only one they have left. That sounds more realistic. I should have known. Take these. The shadowy wizard held out a slim, gloved hand, palm up. Above the hand, there suddenly flashed in existence two glittering objects: a tiny sphere of emerald and a ring of gold with a single black jewel. Ronan held out his own hand in the same manner, and the two items appeared above it. He seized both and inspected them. I recognize the Spear of Scene, but not this other. It feels powerful, but not. I'm guessing in an aggressive manner? You're astute, which is why I took up your cause in the first place, Ronan. The sphere's purpose, you know. The ring will serve as protection. You go into a realm where orc warlocks still exist. This ring will help shield you from their own devices of detection. Regrettably, it will also make it difficult for us to monitor you. So I'll be on my own. Ronan gave his sponsor a sadistic smile. Less chance of me causing any extra deaths anyways. In that regard, you will not be alone. At least as far as the journey to the port. A ranger will escort you. Ronan nodded, although he clearly did not care for any escort, especially a ranger. Ronan and elves did not get along well together. You've not told me my mission. The shadowy wizard propped back as if sitting in an immense chair. The young spellcaster could not see. Gloved hands stippled in the figure seemed to consider the proper choice of words. They have not been easy on you, Ronan. Some in the council even considered forever dismissing you from our ranks. You must earn your way back, and to do that you will have to fulfill this mission to the letter. You make it sound like no easy task. It involves dragons, and something they believe only one of your aptitude can manage to accomplish. Dragons? Ronan's eyes had widened at the first mention of the Leviathans, and, despite his nasty towards arrogance at most times, he knew he sounded more like an apprentice at the moment. Dragons. Simply the mention of them instilled awe in most younger mages. Yes, dragons. His sponsor leaned forward. Make no mistake about this, Ronan. No one else must know of this mission outside of the council and yourself. Not even the ranger who guides you, nor the captain of the Alliance ship who drops you on the shores of Khazad-dûm. If word got out what we hope for you, it could set all the plans in jeopardy. But what is it? Ronan's green eyes flared bright. It would be a quest of tremendous danger, but the rewards were clear enough. It returned to the ranks and obviously added prestige to his reputation. Nothing advanced a wizard's in the Kirin Tor quicker than reputation, although none of the senior council would have ever admitted to that base fact. You are to go to Khazad-dûm, the other said with some hesitation. And once there, set into motion the steps necessary to free her orc captors, the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. Chapter 2. Teresa did not like waiting. Most people thought that elves had the patience of glaciers, but younger ones such as herself, just a year out of her apprenticeship in the Rangers, were very much like humans in that one regard. She had been waiting 3 days for this wizard. She was supposed to escort to one of the eastern ports serving the Great Sea. For the most part, she respected wizards as much as any elf respected a human, but this one had earned nothing but her ire. Teresa wanted to join her sisters and brothers to help hunt down each and every remaining orc still fighting, and send the murderous beast to their well-deserved deaths. The ranger had not expected her first major assignment to be playing nursemaid to some doddering, and clearly forgetful old mage. "1 more hour," she murmured. "1 more hour, and then I leave." Her sleek, chestnut-brown, elven mare snorted ever so slightly. Generations of breeding had created an animal far superior to its mundane cousins, or so Veresa's people believed. The mare was in tune with her rider, and what would have seemed to most nothing more than a simple grunt from the horse immediately set the ranger to her feet, a long shaft already notched in her bow. Yet the woods around her spoke only of quiet, not treachery, and this deep within the Lordaeron alliance she could hardly expect an attack by either orcs or trolls. She glanced in the direction of a small inn that had been designated the meeting place, but other than a stable boy carrying hay, Verisa saw no one. Still, the elf did not lower her bow. Her mount rarely made a sound unless some trouble was lurked nearby. Bandits, perhaps. So the ranger turned in a circle. The wind whipped some of the long, silver-white hair across her face, but not enough to obscure her sharp sight. Almond-shaped eyes, the color of the purest sky blue, drank in even the most minute shift of foliage, and the lengthy pointed ears that rose from her thick hair could pick up even the sound of a butterfly landing on a nearby flower. And still, she could find no reason for the mare's warning. Perhaps she had frightened away whatever supposed menace had been nearby. Like all elves, Risa knew she made an impressive appearance. Taller than most humans, the ranger stood clad in knee-high leather boots, forest green pants, and a blouse, and an oak-brown travel cloak. Gloves that stretched nearly to her elbow protected her hands while yet enabling her to use her bow or the sword hanging at her side with ease. Over her blouse, she wore a sturdy breastplate, fashioned to her slim but still curved form. One of the locals in the inn had made the mistake of admiring the feminine aspects of her appearance while entirely ignoring the military ones. Because he had been drunk and possibly would have held back his rude suggestion, otherwise, Reese had only left him with a few broken fingers. The mare snorted again. The ranger glared at her mount, words of reprimand forming on her lips. You would be Verisa Windrunner, I presume?" A low, arresting voice on her blind side suddenly commented. He had the tip of the shaft directed at his throat before he could say more. Had Verisa let the arrow loose, it would have shot completely through the newcomer's neck, exiting through the other side. Curiously, he seemed unimpressed by this deadly fact. The elf stared him up and down. Not an entirely unpleasant task, she had to admit, and realized that her sudden intruder could only be the wizard from whom she had been waiting. Certainly that would explain her mount's peculiar actions and her own inability to sense his presence before this. "You are Ronan?" the ranger finally asks. "Not what you were expecting," he returned with just a hint of sardonic smile. She lowered the bow, relaxing slightly. "They said a wizard. That was all, human." "And they told me an elven ranger. Nothing more." He gave her a glance that almost made Risa raise the bow again. "So we find ourselves even in this matter." "Not quite. I've waited here for 3 days. 3 valuable days wasted." "It couldn't be helped. Preparations needed to be made," the wizard said, and nothing more. Risa gave up. Like most humans, this one cared nothing for anyone but himself. She considered herself fortunate that she had not had to wait longer. It amazed her that the Alliance could have ever triumphed against the Horde, with so many like this Ronin in their ranks. "Well, if you wish to make a passage to Cosmodan, then it would be best if we left immediately." The elf peered behind him. "Where is your mount?" She half expected him to tell her that he had none, that he had used his formidable power to transport himself all the way here. But if that had been the case, Ronan would not have needed her to guide him to the ship. As a wizard, he no doubt had impressive abilities, but he also had his limits. Besides, from what little she knew of his mission, she suspected that Ronan would need everything he had just to survive. Cosmodan was not a land welcoming to outsiders. The skulls of many brave warriors decorated the orcs' tents there, so she had heard, and dragons consistently patrolled the skies. No, not a place even Varisa would have gone without an army at her side. She was no coward, but she was also no fool. Tired, near a tough near a tough by the inn, so we can get some water. I've already ridden long today, milady. His use of the title for her might have flattered Risa, if not for the slight touch of sarcasm she thought she noted in his tone. Fighting down her irritation with the human, she turned to her own horse, replaced the bow and shaft, then proceeded to ready her animal for the ride. My horse could do with a few more minutes' rest, the wizard suggested, and so could I. You will learn to sleep in the saddle quick enough. At the pace I set at first will enable your steed to recoup. I've waited far too long. Few ships, even those of Kulturas, are endeared to the thought of sailing to Cosmodan simply for a wizard on observation duty. If you do not reach port soon, they may decide to leave. They may decide that they have more worthy and less suicidal matters with which to deal. To her relief, Ronan did not argue. Instead, with a frown, he turned and headed back toward the inn. Verisa watched him depart, hoping that she would not find herself tempted to run him through before they managed to part company. She wondered about his mission. True, Casmodan remained a threat because of the dragons and their orc masters there, but the Alliance already had other, more well-trained observers in and around the land. Verisa suspected that Ronan's mission concerned a very serious matter, or else the Kirin Tor would have never risked so much for this arrogant mage. Still, had they considered the matter well enough when they had chosen him? Surely there had to have been someone more able and trustworthy. This wizard had a look to him that spoke of a streak of unpredictability that might lead to disaster. The elf tried to shrug off her doubts. The Kirin Tor had made up their minds in this matter, and the Alliance command had clearly agreed with them, or else she would have not been sent along to guide him. Best she put aside any concerns. All she had to do was deliver her charge to his vessel, and then Verisa could be on her way. What Ronan might or might not do after their separation did not concern her in the least. For 4 days they journeyed, never once threatened by anything more dangerous than a few annoying insects. Had circumstance been different, the trek might have seemed almost idyllic, if not for the fact that Ronan and his guide had barely spoken with one another all that time. For the most part, the wizard had not been bothered much by the facts. His thoughts focused on the dangerous task ahead. Once the Alliance ship brought him to the shores of Cosmodan, he would be on his own, in a realm still overrun not only with orcs, but patrolled from the skies by their captive dragons. While no coward, Ronan had a little desire to face torture and slow agonizing death. For that alone, his benefactor in the council had provided him with at least known movements of the Dragonmaw clan. Dragonmaw would be the most on the watch now, especially if, as Ronan had been told, the Black Leviathan Deathwing did indeed live. Yet, as dangerous as the mage's quest appeared, Ronan would not have turned back. He had been given an opportunity not only redeem himself, but to advance among the Kirin Tor. For that, he would forever be most grateful to his patron, whom he only knew by name, Crassus. The title was surely a false one, not an uncommon practice amongst those in the ruling council. The Masters of Dalaran were chosen in secret, their ascension known only to their fellows, not even their loved ones. The voice of Ronan's benefactor could be nothing like his true voice. If male, was even the correct gender. It was possible to guess the identities of some of the inner circle, but Crassus remained an enigma even to his clever agent. In truth, though, Ronan barely even cared about Crassus's identity anymore, only that through him, the younger wizard could achieve his own dreams. But those dreams would remain distant ones if he never made his ship. Leaning forward in his saddle, he asked, "How much further to Hazak?" Without turning, Risa blandly replied, 3 more days at least. Do not worry, our pace will not get us to the port on time. Ronan leaned back again. So much for their latest conversation, only the second of today. The only thing possibly worse than riding with an elf would have been traveling with one of the dour knights of the Silver Hand. Despite their ever-present courtesy, the Paladins generally made it clear that they considered magic an occasional, necessary evil, one with which they would do without at all other times. The last one that Ronan had encountered had quite clearly indicated that he believed that after death the mage's soul would be condemned to the same pits of darkness shared by the mythical demons of old. This, no matter how pure Ronan's soul might have been otherwise. The late afternoon sun began to sink among the treetops, creating concentrating areas of brightness and dark shadow among the trees. Ronan had hoped to reach the edge of the woods before dark, but clearly they would not do so. Not for the first time, he ran through his mental maps, trying not only to place their present location, but verify what his companion had said about still making the ship. His delay in meeting with Risa had been unavoidable, the product of trying to find necessary supplies and components. He had only hoped it would still not prove to jeopardize his entire mission: to free the Dragon Queen. An improbable quest to some, certain death to most. Yet even during the war, Ronan had proposed such. Clearly, if the Dragon Queen were freed, it would at the very least strip the remaining orcs one of their greatest weapons. However, circumstances had never enabled such a monumental quest to come to fruition. Ronan knew most of the council hoped he would fail. To be rid of him would be to erase what they considered a black mark from the history of the Order. This mission had a double edge to it. They'd be astounded if he had succeeded, but relieved if he failed. At least he could trust Crassus. The wizard had first come to him, asking if his younger counterpart still believed he could do the impossible. Dragon Maul clan would forever retain its hold on Casmodan unless Alexstrasza was freed, and so long as the orcs continued the work of the Horde, they remained a possible rallying point for those in the guarded enclaves. No one wanted the war renewed. The Alliance had enough strife within its own ranks to keep it busy. A brief rumble of thunder disturbed Ronan's contemplations. He looked up, but saw only a few cottony clouds. Frowning, the fiery-haired spellcaster turned his gaze towards the elf, intending to ask her if she, too, had heard the thunder. A second, more menacing rumble set every muscle taut. At the same time, Brisa leapt at him, the ranger somehow having managed to turn in the saddle and push herself in his direction. A massive shadow covered the surroundings. The ranger and the wizard collided, the elf's armored weight shoving both off the back of Ronan's own mount. An ear-shattering roar shook the vicinity, and a force akin to a tornado ripped at the landscape. As the wizard struck the hard ground, though the shock of pain, he heard the brief whining of his mount. A sound cut off the next moment. "Keep down!" Risa called above the wind and roar. "Keep down!" Ronan, though, twisted around as to see the heavens, and saw instead a hellish sight. A dragon, the color of the raging fire, filled the skies above. In its forepaws it held what remained of his horse and his costly, carefully chosen supplies. The crimson leviathan consumed in one gulp the rest of the carcass, eyes already fixed on the tiny, pathetic figures below. And sat atop the shoulders of the beast, a grotesque greenish figure with tusks and a battle axe that looked nearly as large as the mage, barked orders in some hellish, harsh tongue and pointed directly at Ronan. Maul gaping, talons bared, the dragon drove towards him. Ah, thank you for your time, your majesty, the tall, black-haired noble said in a voice full of strength and understanding. Perhaps we can yet keep this crisis from tearing your good work asunder. If so, returned the older bearded figure, clad in elegant white and gold robes of state, Lord Oran and the Alliance will have much to thank you for, Lord Pestor. It's only because of your work that I feel Gnaeus and Stormgrad might yet see reason. Although no slight man himself, King Tyrannus felt a little overwhelmed by his larger companion. The younger man smiled, revealing perfect teeth. If Tyrannus could have found a more regal-looking man than Lord Pestor, he would have been surprised. With his short, well-groomed black hair, clean-shaven, hawk-like features that had set many of the women in the court Twitter, quick mind, and a bearing more princely than any prince in the Alliance, it was not at all surprising that everyone involved in the Alterac situation had taken to him, Gen Greymane included. Pestor had an engaging manner that had actually made the ruler of Gilneas smile on a rare occasion. So Tyrannus, marveling diplomat, had informed him. For a young noble whom no one had even heard of prior to the 5 years before, the king's guest had made quite a reputation for himself. Pestor came from the most mountainous, most obscure regions of Lordaeron, but could claim bloodlines to the royal house of Alterac as well. His tiny domain had been destroyed during the war by a dragon attack, and he had come to the capital on foot, without even one servant to dress him. His plight, and what he had made for himself since his arrival, had become the thing of storybook tales. More important, his advice had aided the king many times, including during the dark days when the Greying monarch had debated on what to do about Lord Perinold. Pestor had, in fact, been the swaying factor. He had given Tyrannus the encouragement needed to seize power in Alterac, then solidify martial law there. Stormgrad and the other kingdoms had understood the need for action against the traitorous Perinold, but not Lordaeron's continued hold of that kingdom for its own purposes after the war had ended. Now, at least, Pestor appeared to be the one who could explain it all to them and make them accept any final decision, which had, of late, made the aging, brooding, featured monarch mull over a possible solution that would stun even the clever man before him. Tyrannus refused to turn over Alterac to Perinold's nephew, whom Gilneas had tried to support, nor did he think it would divide the kingdom in question between Lordaeron and Stormgrad. That would surely earn the wrath of not only Gilneas, but Kulturas even. Annexing Alterac completely was also out of the question. What if, though, he placed the region in the capable hands of one admired by all, one who had shown he wanted nothing but peace and unity? An able administrator, too, if King Tyrannus were any judge, not to mention someone certain to remain a true ally and friend of Lordaeron. No, indeed, Pestor. The king reached up to pat the much taller lord, on the shoulder. Pestor had to be nearly 7 feet in height, but while slim, he could hardly be called lanky. Pestor well fit his blue and black dress uniform, looking every inch the martial hero. You've been much to be proud about, and much to be rewarded for. I'll not soon forget your part in this. Believe me. Prestor fairly beamed, like believing he would soon have his tiny realm restored to him. Tyrannus decided to let the boy keep that little dream. When the ruler of Lordaeron proposed him as the new monarch of Alterac, the expression on Prestor's face would be that much more entertaining. It was not every day that someone became king, unless they inherited the position, of course. Tyrannus' honored guests saluted him, then bowed gracefully, retreating from the imperial chamber. The elder man frowned after Pestor left, thinking that the silken curtains, the golden chandeliers, and even the pure white marble floor could not brighten the room enough now the young noble had departed. Truly, Lord Pestor stood out among the many odious couriers flocking the place. Here was a man anyone could believe in, a man worthy of trust and respect in all manners. Tyrannus wished his own son could have been more like Prestor. The king rubbed his bearded chin. Yes, the perfect man to rebuild the honor of a land and, at the same time, restore harmony between the members of the alliance. New and strong blood. Considering the matter further, Tyrannus thought of his daughter, Callia. Still a child, but certainly soon to be a beauty. Perhaps one day, if matters went well, he and Prestor could strengthen their friendship and alliance with a royal marriage, too. Yes, he would go talk to his advisors now, relate to them his royal opinion. Tyrannus felt certain they would agree with him on this decision. He had met no one yet who disliked the young noble. King Prestor of Alterac. Tyrannus could just imagine the look on his friend's face when he learned the extent of his reward. You've the shadow of a smile on your face. Did someone die horribly? Grisly, bloody death? Oh, venomous one. Spare me your whimsicums, Krill, Lord Pestor replied as he shut the great iron door behind him. Above, in the old chalet given to him by his host, King Tyrannus, servants specifically chosen by Pestor stood guard to see that no unwanted visitors dropped in. Their master had work to do, and even if they had been made to know that it would be their lives if he was disturbed. Prestor expected no interruptions, and trusted that those lackeys would obey to the death. The spell upon them, a variation of the one that caused the king and his court to so admire the dashing refugee, allowed no room for second thoughts. He had honed its effectiveness quite well over time. Most humbled apologies, O Prince of Duplicity, rasped the smaller, weary figure before him. The tone in the other's voice held hints of mischief and madness in an inhuman quality. Not surprising, as Prestor's companion was a goblin. His head barely reaching above the noble's belt buckle, some might have taken the slight emerald-green creature for weak and simple. The madcap grin, however, revealed long teeth so very sharp and a tongue blood-red and almost forked. Narrow yellow eyes with no visible pupils sparkled with merriment, but the sort of merriment that came from pulling the wings off flies or the arms off experimental subjects. A ridge of dull brown fur rose up from behind the goblin's neck, finishing as a wild crest above the hideous creature's squat forehead. Still, there's reason to celebrate. The lower chamber had once been used to house supplies in those days. The coolness of the earth had kept wine rack after wine rack at just the right temperature. Now, however, thanks to a little engineering on the part of Krill, the vast room felt as if it sat in the middle of a raging volcano. The Lord Prestor, it felt just like home.
Celebrate, O Master of Descent!
Krill giggled. Krill giggled a lot, especially when foul work was afoot. The emerald creature's two chief passions were experimentation and mayhem. And whenever possible, he combined the two. The back half of the chamber was, in fact, filled with benches, flasks, powder, powders, cautious mechanisms, and macabre collections, all gathered by the goblin. Yes. Celebrate, Krill. Pestor's penetrating, ebony eyes fixed unblinkingly on the goblin, who suddenly lost his smile and semblance of mockery. You would like to be around to join the celebration, wouldn't you?
Yes, Master.
The uniformed noble took a moment to breathe in the stifling air. An expression of relief crossed his angular features. Ugh. How I miss it. His face hardened. But I must wait. Go only when necessary. Eh, Krill?
As you say, Master.
The smile, now so very sinister, returned to Pestor's expression. You are likely looking at the next king of Alterac, you know. The goblin bent his narrow but muscular body nearly to the ground.
All hail his royal majesty, King D.
A clattering made both glance to the right. From a metal grate leading to an old ventilation shaft emerged a smaller goblin. Nimbly, the tiny figure pulled itself through the opening and rushed over to Krill. The newcomer wore a fiendish, amused look on his ugly face, a look that quickly faded under Prestor's intense gaze. The second goblin whispered something into Krill's large, pointed ear. Krill hissed, then dismissed the other creature with a negligent wave of the hand. The newcomer vanished back in through the open grate. What is it? Although the words came calmly and smooth from the lips of the aristocrat, they also clearly demand no hesitation on the part of the goblin to answer.
Ah, gracious one,
Krill began. The madcap smile once more upon his bestial face.
Luck is with you this day, it seems. Perhaps you should consider making a wager somewhere. The stars must truly favor.
What is it?
Someone is attempting to free Alexstrasza.
Pestor stared. He stared so long and with such intensity that Krill fairly shriveled up before him. Surely now, the goblin imagined, surely now death would come. A pity that. There had been so many more experiments he had wanted to try, so many more explosives to test. At that moment, the tall black figure before him broke out laughing, a deep, dark, and not eternally natural laugh. Lord Pestor managed to utter between bouts of mirth. He stretched his arms out as if seeking to capture the very air. His fingers seemed impossibly long and almost clawed. So perfect. He continued to laugh, and as he did, the goblin Krill settled back, marveled in the odd sight, and shaking his head ever so slightly. And they call me, he muttered under his breath.